I got a question for you, strategic.
Okay.
And Deontay, you could give your point of view too. The question that I have that been like weighing on my mind is are civilians supposed to comply to everything an officer say, especially like in a situation when they're not being detained?
All right. So first of all, well, those are two separate things. If you're
Okay.
not being detained, then it depends on what the officer is asking you for. You have a duty
Okay.
to comply. So it also depends on what state you're in. So
Okay.
if you're in a state that says that you have to comply with giving an officer your identification, you're not being detained, but the officer has a right to ask for that identification. If you don't give that identification, now you've broken the law and you become detained and possibly arrested because you
Okay.
did not comply with that lawful request. If you're just walking down the street and the officer's like, yo, what's up? Let me talk to you for a second. And you're like, why? Am I being detained? And they're like, no, I just want to talk to you. Maybe they want to ask you what the time is. I don't know. And you say, nope, I don't want to. You have a right to walk off. You have a right to walk off. All right. You don't have to comply because that officer doesn't have a lawful reason to stop you, you know?
Hmm.
But when you are detained or when that officer is lawfully requesting something from you that you have to lawfully give, even if you're not detained, you have a duty by law to comply. It is not your choice. You have a duty to comply. And if you don't comply, then that officer now has to use whatever avenues in the law to make you comply, whether that is taking you into custody, writing you a ticket, whatever it is, but you have to comply.
I've seen videos where you would see an officer going back and forth with a civilian or whatever, and I guess since the civilian got under the officer's skin,
Mm,
it then escalate to I'm gonna arrest you. Put your hands behind your back. You're being detained. You get what I'm saying? Like
right.
so. How does a situation like that? Like how do you go from a back and forth banter to now you're being detained?
All right. So that officer, without knowing which specific video we're talking about, because there are so many,
Yeah.
that officer, if they're clearly arresting that person because that person got under their skin, that officer is wrong. They're acting unlawfully, but you still have to comply because you don't know if they're acting lawfully because the law gives them that deference. See, the law doesn't want civilians questioning police officers every step of the way because what that does is it interferes with police officers doing their duty. But the law gives civilians recourse. The recourse is all right, I have you on camera because we're talking about ones that's on camera, and of course we know a lot happens off camera that never get comes to light, and that's
Yeah.
sad and it's
Yeah.
unfortunate. But we're talking about the ones that's on camera because that's the easiest way. So we're gonna
Yeah.
do easy, right?
Yeah.
It's on camera that I clearly got under your skin and you're detaining me for no reason. You know what that is? That's lawsuit. That's one of your recourses. You know what that is? That's filing complaints against that officer that could get that officer disciplined, whether that be fired, suspended, or whatever. That's your recourse. That is what your lawmakers have put into effect to protect you from the tyranny of bad officers. But
Mm.
when you go ahead and you start resisting and you start winning the fight, you
Yeah.
now justify that officer's action even though they started out unlawfully.
And my question now is once you start resisting and reacting that matter, that makes you kind of lose your potential lawsuit, so to speak.
It because
It
it's so complicated,
yeah.
it's hard to say with definitively whether that's the case. What I can say is it makes things complicated. A good example is if somebody punches you, lawfully you have a right to punch them back to defend yourself. But if somebody punches you in your chest and you're a mixed martial artist, and then you start pummeling them about the face, their teeth all over the place, their eyes all over the place, and they're no longer fighting back. You now become the aggressor via the law. You now get charged with a felony assault two charge, and that person either gets charged with nothing or violation, which is not a crime, even though they started the fight. You became the aggressor because what you did was worse than what initially happened. So if I say, cross the street because this is a crime scene, and you say, no, I know my rights. I can lawfully record here. And you're 100% correct. And I say, no, get across the street. And you say, F you, cop, and all that stuff. And now I unlawfully say, you know what? I'm going to arrest you. But now while I'm trying to arrest you, you're fighting me and you're reaching for my gun and I shoot you. Did I unlawfully arrest you in the first place? Yes. But is you reaching for my gun a worser thing than me unlawfully arresting you? And am I justified in shooting you for you reaching my gun? You understand?
I
The
get what you
roles kind of flipped. Even
yeah.
though you were in the right, you became in the bad. That's why the smartest thing to do is just comply.
What is your take on that, Deontay?
I'm gonna agree with mostly all of that. Yeah, my whole thing is just comply. It doesn't matter what, just comply. But here's the thing. Yes, you're supposed to comply, like he said. But when you don't comply, here's where I disagree with him. When you don't comply, and then the police officer goes and does whatever the police officer does, that does not make what the police officer did correct. Sure, I think where you were going with it, Wally, is that it loses you the high ground in a civil court or whatever, but it shouldn't give the police grounds to do just anything they want. If they're acting unlawfully and then you reach for the gun and then they shoot you, that's still, they were in the wrong, and they were in the wrong the whole time. It's no different if I had a gun and I start a fight and somebody gets the better of me and then I shoot him, but I started the fight. I'm still in the wrong, and I'm still gonna go to jail for that. I'm still gonna have consequences for that. Why wouldn't the police have consequences for that?
Now, some of what you said is not true. If the law says that if you are having a fight and you started the fight and the person start besting you and they put your life in mortal danger, you do have the right to now shoot them and get a self-defense charge. It happens all the time. That's what happened with Trayvon Martin. Trayvon Martin, the devil started with this young man that did nothing wrong, as just visiting his father. But that young man was in much better shape than that dude and bested him and started beating him up. And then because he was losing, he shot Trayvon Martin and killed him. And a jury, I believe wrongly, but a jury decided that it was self-defense.
But there you go, wrongly, because I've seen this go both ways. It depends on certain situations. It works for a lot of times when it's a young Black man, it works against him. When it's a white person, it works for them. When it's a police, 99% of the time, it works for them. So there's a bias that's too heavily, there's a too strong of a bias there.
No, you're right. There is bias in the law, but the law does state that the dynamic that I explained to you about starting off the fight but having a gun, and then if you feel that your life is in mortal danger, you're using it. The law says that you're justified. But you said something in your video earlier I found very interesting, and I feel like we need to address that. So often when police are involved in these type of interactions, people always say, well, if I did that, this would happen to me, that would happen to me. The truth of the matter is that police and civilians are two separate things. The law allows us to do things that you can't do. That's part of the social contract. That's part of what makes policing work. So for instance, police are allowed to go one step above when it comes to force. So if you act like you're gonna punch a cop could punch you. You know, if you're punching a cop could use a baton. If you got a baton or a knife in your hand, a cop could use a gun. You know what I'm saying? If you just being belligerent and pulling away, a cop could tase you. Those are all one step above whatever force you're doing. So often we see people doing certain things, and then we see the officer doing what we think is excessive when it's really just one step above what that person's doing. And we say, well, if I did that, I would get in trouble. Of course you get in trouble, because the law does not give you that leeway. But every state has a position, rather I should say a provision in their criminal law that says this is what cops get to do. This is allowing them to do those things. You guys get where I'm going with this one? Because I think it's going to segue into the discussion that we were going to have about that Dade County young lady in the airport. Yeah. I'd love to hear your opinions on that.
But the problem is that the police already get that leeway where they can go one step above, but then we give them leeway where they could go 10 steps above, and we never punish the police. Like, the police very often are very little will they ever get punished. And when they do get punished, it's a minor slap on the wrist or not even a real punishment at all. They have little repercussions for anything they do. Like, I could see some things, yeah, police should have that leeway, but they don't get any repercussions for anything. Nah, it don't flow well with me.
To view the full video, click the link in the description or subscribe to the Strategic Eyes channel. And don't forget to hit that like button and share it amongst your friends.